It didn't start with an argument or a confession. There were no dramatic accusations hurled across a dinner table, no cryptic voicemails left to discover at just the right moment. For most of our 9 years together, I believed Sarah and I were the epitome of stability. We had what others called an aspirational marriage, a brownstone in Brooklyn, steady careers, and an easy rhythm to our lives. But hindsight has a cruel clarity. The warning signs had always been there, small and innocuous, like stray threads on a perfectly tailored suit. I had ignored them, convinced they were the harmless quirks of a busy couple navigating adulthood. That denial shattered the morning I found the earring. It glinted at me from the corner of our sectional couch, a tiny piece of gold shaped like a crescent moon. Sarah wasn't home. She had left early for a morning bar class, as she often did on Saturdays. But I knew her jewelry as well as I knew her laugh, and this wasn't hers. Sarah had a minimalist style, preferring small studs or simple hoops. The crescent moon was different, flashier. Turning the earring over in my fingers, I felt an unsettling wave of curiosity. Maybe it belonged to a friend, but the thought didn't hold. We hadn't had anyone over recently, and Sarah's closest friends were just as understated as she was. A quiet alarm bell began to ring in the back of my mind, but I set the earring on the coffee table and went about my day. By the time Sarah came home, the earring had all but slipped from my mind. She was her usual self, bright-eyed and full of stories about the latest class drama. I didn't ask her about it then. It seemed too small, too trivial, and I didn't want to sound paranoid. But that night, as I watched her scroll through her phone on the couch, the earring sat on the edge of my consciousness like a pebble in my shoe. Over the next month, those subtle, ignorable oddities grew louder. Sarah started staying later at work, always blaming some deadline or client dinner. Her phone, once a fixture left carelessly on the counter, was suddenly glued to her side. When I tried to hold her hand or pull her close, she'd flinch. Not overtly, but enough for me to notice. One night, I overheard her on the phone, her voice low and laughing. When I asked who she'd been talking to, she gave me a breezy smile. "Oh, just a work thing," she said, brushing it off with a wave of her hand. The explanation was plausible enough, but something about the way she avoided my eyes sent a cold chill up my spine. I tried to ignore it. We were adults with busy lives. Not every moment could be wrapped in a bow of marital perfection. But the disconnect between us was like a growing crack in a foundation, subtle but impossible to ignore. It wasn't until her company hosted a gallery event that the pieces started to fall into place. Sarah worked in creative marketing, and these kinds of soirees were her bread and butter. I tagged along as the supportive spouse, but as soon as we arrived, she disappeared into the crowd, her laughter ringing out above the hum of conversation. That's when I saw him. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a way that suggested wealth without effort. His name tag read Julian R. I caught him staring at Sarah with an intensity that made my skin crawl. She was across the room, holding court with a group of colleagues, but Julian's eyes never left her. When Sarah introduced us, her tone was too bright, too rehearsed. "This is my husband, Eric," she said, her hand brushing Julian's shoulder in a way that felt far too familiar. Julian shook my hand with a practiced smile, but his eyes held something else, something calculating. The rest of the night was a blur of polite small talk and stolen glances. Every time I saw Sarah and Julian together, I felt a quiet unease. They weren't inappropriate, exactly, but there was a familiarity in their body language, a private current running beneath the surface. The final straw came a week later. Sarah had left for another late meeting, and I was home alone, scrolling through Netflix, when her laptop chimed with a notification. Normally, I wouldn't have paid it any mind, but this time, curiosity got the better of me. The message was from Julian. It was short, almost cryptic. "Next time, let's not get interrupted." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My hands hovered over the keyboard as I debated whether to dig deeper. Was I reading too much into it? But the pit in my stomach told me I wasn't. I opened her messaging app and found a thread with Julian that stretched back months. At first, the messages were professional discussions about campaigns, client presentations, and project timelines. But the tone shifted gradually, almost imperceptibly. until the conversations were peppered with inside jokes, personal confessions, and flirtatious banter. And then, there it was, a photo of the earring. Julian had sent it to her weeks ago with a teasing caption. Found this little reminder of our last meeting. Guess it's yours. I sat there, staring at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. The earring wasn't just a clue. It was a confirmation. Sarah had been hiding something, and whatever it was, it involved Julian. As the weight of her betrayal settled over me, one thought kept echoing in my mind. I need to know the whole truth. The days after the confrontation blurred together in a haze of shock and disbelief. I had imagined every possible outcome when I presented Claire with the evidence. Denials, counter-accusations, even anger. But her immediate confession caught me off guard. There was no fight, no attempt to twist the truth. Just a simple admission that tore the foundation of my life apart. Yet, despite her words, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. Something deeper, darker, and still hidden. Claire told me the affair had started during a work retreat 6 months earlier. She described it as a mistake, an emotional lapse during a time when she felt disconnected from me and from herself. She claimed it was never about love or even lust. It was about feeling alive, appreciated. Alex, she said, had filled a void she didn't even know she had. Her words sounded rehearsed, as if she had prepared this speech in her mind long before I ever confronted her. She begged for forgiveness, promising the affair was over and that she would cut all ties with Alex. But something about her demeanor felt off. It wasn't just guilt in her eyes. It was fear. In the days that followed, Claire made an effort to repair our marriage. She deleted Alex's number in front of me, promised transparency, and suggested counseling. But no amount of apologies could silence the nagging feeling in my gut that her confession was only the tip of the iceberg. Her sudden eagerness to fix things felt performative, as though she were trying to distract me. I noticed small, subtle inconsistencies in her behavior. Phone calls she took in the other room, vague explanations about her work schedule, receipts from places I'd never heard of. It was as if she wanted me to believe the affair was over while quietly ensuring I didn't dig any deeper. I decided I couldn't take her at her word. If Claire wouldn't give me the full truth, I would find it myself. Late one night, while Claire slept, I accessed her work laptop, a machine she rarely used at home but had left on the kitchen counter. My hands shook as I scrolled through her emails, my heart pounding with every click. Most of it was mundane office chatter, but one email thread stood out. The subject line read, "Meeting follow-up, confidential." The exchange wasn't between Claire and Alex. It was with someone named Julian, a name I didn't recognize. The emails were cryptic, discussing deliverables and timeline adjustments, in language that sounded professional at first glance. But one phrase caught my eye. "Make sure Alex is on board before we proceed. We can't afford any loose ends." My blood ran cold. What was Claire involved in? The affair had seemed like a personal betrayal, but this email hinted at something far more calculated. I spent the next few days piecing together what I could about Julian. His name appeared on a handful of corporate memos and project briefs tied to Claire's department, but his digital footprint was suspiciously sparse. There were no social media profiles, no personal website, nothing to suggest he was a real employee. I decided to investigate further using a contact I knew in IT. It didn't take long for them to confirm my suspicions. Julian wasn't an employee at Claire's company. He was a contractor hired for a short-term project tied to international accounts. But the nature of his work and his connection to Alex remained unclear. As I dug deeper, a troubling pattern emerged. Alex and Julian had worked together on several projects, all of which involved high-level clients and significant financial transactions. The more I uncovered, the more it seemed like Claire's affair with Alex wasn't just about romance. It was part of something much larger. That evening, I confronted Claire again. This time, I didn't lead with accusations. Instead, I asked her about Julian, watching her face closely for any sign of recognition. Her reaction was immediate and telling. Her eyes widened, and she stammered out a half-hearted explanation about him being a consultant. But when I pressed her about the email, she went silent. "I don't know what you're talking about," she finally said, her voice shaky. "You're reading too much into things." But I wasn't convinced. Her deflections only fueled my determination to uncover the truth. Unable to rely on Claire for answers, I decided to track down Alex myself. It wasn't difficult. His social media posts often included check-ins at trendy bars and gyms around the city. One evening, I spotted him at a rooftop lounge and approached him under the guise of casual conversation. At first, he was dismissive, his cocky demeanor on full display. But when I mentioned Julian's name, his expression shifted. The smug confidence gave way to something colder, more guarded. "Listen," he said, leaning in close. "You don't want to get involved in this. Trust me." Before I could press further, he slipped away into the crowd, leaving me with more questions than answers. That night, I returned home to find Claire waiting for me. She had found the printouts of the emails I'd taken from her laptop, and her face was a mix of anger and fear. "What are you doing, Eric?" she demanded. "Are you trying to destroy what's left of us?" I told her I wasn't trying to destroy anything. I was trying to understand the truth. But as I laid out everything I had uncovered, Claire's composure crumbled. "You don't understand," she said, tears streaming down her face. "It's not what you think." "Then what is it?" I asked, my voice rising in frustration. She hesitated, as though weighing whether to tell me. And then, finally, she spoke. "This isn't just about Alex or me. It's about something bigger. And if you keep digging, you're going to get hurt." Her words sent a chill through me. Whatever I had stumbled into, it was clear that the affair was only the surface of a much deeper mystery. And now there was no turning back. The next phase of uncovering Claire's betrayal was like peeling back layers of a rotten onion. Each revelation was more shocking than the last. And yet, with every piece of evidence I unearthed, I felt a sense of resolve. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was taking charge of the narrative Claire had been crafting behind my back. The private investigator's revelation about Alex and Claire's financial scheming turned my heartbreak into fury. They weren't just cheating emotionally. They were colluding to siphon off our hard-earned assets. I couldn't understand how someone I had shared nearly a decade of my life with could plan something so coldly calculated. The discovery of the forged documents authorizing the sale of our joint investments was the tipping point. These weren't just impulsive, emotionally driven decisions, they were deliberate acts of fraud. Claire and Alex had clearly been planning this for months, if not longer. I decided to lay low, to act as though I was none the wiser. Confronting Claire outright would only give her a chance to cover her tracks or play the victim. Instead, I needed to outmaneuver her on every front. Over the following weeks, I worked closely with my attorney to secure my financial position. Together, we froze all joint accounts and flagged any transactions involving my name for extra scrutiny. I also ensured my attorney filed a formal notice of potential fraud related to the forged documents, which meant that no assets could be liquidated or transferred without my explicit consent. At the same time, I began subtly documenting Claire's behavior at home. Every late-night phone call, every unexplainable absence, every whispered conversation. It all became part of my growing arsenal of evidence. I installed discrete audio recorders in common areas and synced them to a secure cloud account. The recordings captured Claire's phone conversations with Alex, as well as discussions that hinted at their broader plans. Just when I thought I had a clear understanding of the situation, a third name entered the picture. Vanessa. The private investigator discovered that Vanessa was Alex's long-term girlfriend. At least, she had been until a few months ago. It seemed that Claire wasn't Alex's first mark, and Vanessa had been his unwitting accomplice in a similar scheme in another state. Vanessa's story was eerily familiar. Alex had charmed her, convinced her to move in with him, and then systematically drained her finances before disappearing. She had filed a police report but had been unable to recover her losses. Learning this, I decided to reach out to her. If Alex had a history of this behavior, it could bolster my case. Vanessa was wary at first, but once I explained my situation, she opened up. She provided bank statements, messages, and even photos of Alex that mirrored his current relationship with Claire. Her cooperation was a godsend, and her evidence painted a damning picture of Alex's modus operandi. With the weight of Vanessa's testimony and the evidence I had collected, I decided it was time to confront Claire and Alex directly. But this wasn't going to be a simple sit-down conversation. I wanted their betrayal laid bare in the clearest possible terms, with no chance for denial or manipulation. I arranged for Claire and me to have dinner at home, under the guise of rebuilding trust. As she prepared the meal, I told her I needed to show her something in the living room. On the coffee table, I had laid out printouts of every incriminating document I had gathered: bank statements, email exchanges, recordings, and Vanessa's sworn statement. Claire's face went pale as she scanned the evidence. Her usual composure cracked, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. "This isn't what it looks like," she stammered, but her voice lacked conviction. I didn't respond. Instead, I picked up my phone and dialed Alex's number, putting it on speaker. He answered cheerfully, clearly unaware of what was coming. "Claire isn't here," I said, my voice cold. "But I have everything. And Vanessa is willing to testify. How do you want to handle this?" The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Then Alex hung up. The fallout from that night was swift. Alex disappeared, his social media accounts deleted, and his phone number disconnected. Vanessa and I shared our findings with the authorities, who opened an investigation into Alex's financial crimes. Meanwhile, Claire was left to face the wreckage of her carefully constructed scheme. She begged me not to press charges, claiming she had been manipulated by Alex and had never intended to go through with the fraud. But her pleas fell on deaf ears. I filed for divorce the next morning, citing adultery and financial misconduct as grounds. My attorney assured me that with the evidence we had, Claire would walk away with little more than her personal belongings. Just as I began to think the nightmare was over, I received an email from Vanessa. She had been contacted by someone claiming to have more information about Alex, a former accomplice who was willing to talk in exchange for anonymity. The accomplice revealed that Alex had been part of a larger network of con artists, targeting affluent couples with vulnerabilities they could exploit. The realization that Claire's betrayal had been part of something so sinister was both horrifying and oddly liberating. It meant that while her actions had been deeply personal to me, they had also been part of a broader, calculated operation. In the end, I chose to let go of my anger and focus on rebuilding my life. I couldn't change what had happened, but I could ensure that Claire and Alex's actions didn't define my future. With the divorce finalized and my finances secure, I moved to a new city and started fresh. Vanessa and I stayed in touch, bonded by our shared experiences. She eventually helped expose more members of Alex's network, bringing some measure of justice to others who had been wronged. Looking back, I realized that the betrayal I had endured had taught me the value of resilience and the importance of trusting my instincts. Life, I learned, has a way of forcing us to grow through adversity. And while the scars of betrayal never fully fade, they remind us of the strength we have to overcome even the darkest of times. The morning of the confrontation felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing that once I stepped off, there would be no going back. I had rehearsed every word, every possible response Claire might throw my way, but the uncertainty of her reaction still gnawed at me. The evidence was ironclad, but confronting someone you once loved deeply was never as simple as presenting the facts. I waited until Ethan was safely at school, the house quiet except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. Claire emerged from the kitchen with her morning coffee, her expression curious but unsuspecting. I asked her to sit, my voice calm but firm, and laid the thick folder of evidence on the table between us. "What's this?" she asked, her tone a mix of annoyance and confusion. "It's the truth, Claire," I replied, "and it's time we talk about it." I began with the small details, the ones she might dismiss as coincidence or overreaction: her increasingly frequent book club meetings, the unexplained withdrawals from our accounts, the jewelry and hotel receipts. Her initial response was defensive, denying any wrongdoing and accusing me of invading her privacy. But as I moved on to the messages with Alex, the secret account, and the payments to James Kessler, her attorney, the color drained from her face. Her bravado cracked when I pulled out the printouts of her emails with Alex. I read aloud one in particular, where she and Alex discussed transferring the remaining funds before they left town together. Claire's hands trembled as she tried to form a response, but the words caught in her throat. "It's not what it looks like," she finally stammered. "Alex," he pressured me. I didn't know what else to do. I didn't let her deflect. You didn't know what to do? Claire, you were planning to take everything. You were willing to destroy our family for what? A fresh start with a con man. Her tears began to flow, and she begged for forgiveness, claiming she had been manipulated by Alex. But I wasn't interested in her justifications. I reminded her that she had made choices, calculated, deliberate choices, and now she had to face the consequences. As the confrontation reached its peak, I decided to reveal the latest twist, Alex's betrayal of her. I explained how my lawyer had uncovered emails suggesting that Alex had planned to leave Claire as soon as the money was in his hands. Her shock was palpable, her face crumpling as the full weight of her situation hit her. He used me, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't respond. I wasn't interested in comforting her or offering absolution. Instead, I made my position clear. Our marriage was over. I handed her a copy of the divorce papers my lawyer had prepared, outlining my intent to pursue full custody of Ethan and detailing the fraud charges I planned to file against Alex. You've destroyed everything, Claire, I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside me. But I'm going to make sure Ethan and I come out of this okay. You'll have to figure out the rest on your own. The days that followed were a whirlwind of legal battles and emotional fallout. Claire moved out of the house and into a small apartment, her once flawless image now tarnished. Our friends and family, once in awe of our seemingly perfect life, were stunned by the revelations. While some offered support, others distanced themselves, unwilling to be caught in the crossfire. Alex's life unraveled even faster. The evidence of his fraudulent schemes, coupled with Vanessa's testimony about his past, painted a damning picture. Authorities launched an investigation into his activities, and he was eventually arrested on charges of embezzlement and fraud. The charm he had used to manipulate so many people proved useless in the face of hard evidence. Despite the chaos, I found solace in the simple moments with Ethan. He was too young to fully understand the situation, but I made it my mission to shield him from the worst of it. Our evenings were filled with board games, bedtime stories, and laughter that reminded me of what truly mattered. One night, as I tucked him in, he asked, "Is Mom ever coming back home?" I hesitated, searching for the right words. "Mom and I won't be living together anymore," I said gently. "But we both love you very much, and that will never change." He seemed to accept the answer, snuggling into his blanket with a small nod. His resilience gave me hope, a reminder that we would get through this together. With the divorce finalized, I began the slow process of rebuilding. I sold the house, unable to bear the memories it held, and moved to a smaller place closer to Ethan's school. I threw myself into my work, finding fulfillment in the projects I had once taken for granted. Therapy helped me navigate the emotional aftermath, teaching me to let go of the anger and focus on the future. Claire's relationship with Ethan became more strained as the months passed. She tried to mend things, but her actions had left a lasting impact. Ethan preferred the stability of our home, and while I encouraged him to maintain a relationship with his mother, I didn't force it. One sunny afternoon, as Ethan and I walked through the park, he paused and looked up at me. "Are we going to be okay, Dad?" he asked, his small hand slipping into mine. I smiled, ruffling his hair. "We already are, buddy." As we continued our walk, I realized that the pain of the past had given way to something new, a sense of peace. Life would never be the same, but it didn't have to be. I had Ethan, and together, we were building a future filled with love, trust, and resilience. And that, I knew, was more than enough. The months following the final confrontation were a mix of struggle and discovery. The anger and heartbreak that had defined my days slowly gave way to something else. Clarity. Life didn't feel whole yet, but it felt possible. Each day became a step forward, and though some steps were heavy, I knew I was moving in the right direction. Ethan continued to amaze me with his ability to adapt. He didn't seem to dwell on the upheaval in our lives, but I could tell he was watching me closely. I made sure to show him that life could still be good. We developed new routines, Friday night movie marathons, weekend hikes, and impromptu ice cream runs. One evening, as we sat on the couch watching an old comedy, Ethan leaned against me and asked, "Are you happy, Dad?" His question caught me off guard. I hesitated for a moment before answering honestly. I think I'm getting there, I said. What about you? He smiled, his face lit by the flickering TV screen. Yeah, I like how things are now. Just us. That simple affirmation filled me with both pride and determination. I knew then that whatever came next, I had to keep building a life that would make him feel secure and loved. Claire's fall had been steep, but to her credit, she didn't disappear into the wreckage. She sought therapy, started working a modest job, and seemed genuinely focused on mending her relationship with Ethan. Though our interactions remained formal, I could see her effort. One afternoon, during a drop-off, she pulled me aside. "Thank you," she said, her voice uncharacteristically soft. "For what?" I asked, genuinely surprised. "For not keeping Ethan away from me," she replied. "I know I don't deserve it, but I'm trying." Her words didn't erase the past, but they did remind me of the complexity of her humanity. People make mistakes, some unforgivable, but they can also try to be better. I nodded, not out of forgiveness, but out of acknowledgement. It was a crisp autumn day when I ran into Alex. I was at a local park, watching Ethan kick a soccer ball around with some friends, when I noticed a man sitting alone on a bench. He looked familiar, but it took a moment for me to place him. Alex had changed. His once confident demeanor was replaced by an air of quiet humility. When our eyes met, he gave a small, almost sheepish wave. Against my better judgment, I approached him. "Didn't expect to see you here," I said, keeping my tone neutral. He shrugged. "I didn't expect to be here either," he admitted. Our conversation was brief. He told me that he had left town after the fallout but had returned to tie up loose ends. He didn't ask about Claire or Ethan, and I didn't volunteer any information. Before I walked away, he said something that stayed with me. "I never thought I'd feel this way, but I'm glad you found out. You deserved better." I nodded, unsure of how to respond. It wasn't the apology I had imagined, but it felt real. And in a strange way, it gave me a sense of closure I hadn't realized I still needed. As life settled into its new normal, I began to open myself up to new possibilities. I joined a local community group, rediscovered my passion for photography, and even started dating again. It wasn't easy. Trust didn't come naturally anymore, but I found joy in small, meaningful connections. One evening, at a charity event, I met a woman named Rachel. She was kind, witty, and unapologetically herself. Our conversation flowed effortlessly, and for the first time in years, I felt a spark of hope. We started seeing each other casually, taking things slow. I wasn't ready to dive headfirst into a new relationship, but Rachel understood that. She became a friend first, someone who reminded me that life could still be beautiful despite its messiness. Ethan and I continued to thrive in our own way. He grew taller, stronger, and more confident with each passing day. Our bond deepened, shaped by the challenges we had faced together. One day, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Ethan turned to me and said, "I think Mom's trying to be better." I nodded. "I think she is too." "Do you think people can change?" he asked, his young mind grappling with the complexities of forgiveness. "I think they can," I said, "but it's up to us to decide how much of their change we let into our lives." He seemed to ponder this for a moment before nodding, satisfied. As I sit here now, writing these words, I can't help but marvel at how far we've come. The pain of Claire's betrayal no longer defines me. Instead, it has become a chapter in the story of my life. A chapter that taught me about resilience, self-worth, and the importance of letting go. Ethan's laughter echoes through the house as he plays with the dog, a reminder of everything I still have to be grateful for. Life isn't perfect, but it's real, and it's mine. And for that, I am thankful.